The Arrival, Hook and Suspense. The night sky was broken by fire. A human ship, damaged and burning, cut through the clouds of an unknown world. It screamed across the sky like a falling star, leaving behind trails of smoke. Inside, one man held onto the controls, fighting to keep the craft steady. His name was Captain Ryan Cole, a soldier who had seen many wars but never a place like this. With a thunderous crash, the ship tore into the forest, trees snapping like sticks under its weight. Metal groaned, sparks flew, and then there was silence. Only smoke rose, curling into the cold night air. Ryan's eyes opened slowly. His head throbbed, his suit torn, and alarms still blinked weakly around him. He coughed, pushed himself up, and looked outside. The forest was strange. Giant, glowing plants, trees that whispered in the wind, and a sky filled with two moons. It felt like another galaxy, far from any human world. But he was not alone. From the shadows, small figures appeared. At first, Ryan thought they were children, but when he looked closer, his heart froze. These were not humans. They were aliens, tiny, no taller than his knee. Their skin shone faintly under the moonlight, some green, some blue, some golden. Their eyes were wide, glowing softly like fireflies. They carried tiny spears made of crystal and wood. Their armor looked like leaves and shells, fragile, delicate, almost harmless. Yet they stood in a circle around the fallen ship, staring at the giant human who had come from the stars. Ryan stayed still. His training told him not to move too fast. Slowly he raised his empty hand, showing he meant no harm. The tiny aliens whispered among themselves in a language he could not understand. Their voices were high, musical, like bells ringing in the wind. One of them pointed at him and cried out. The others stepped back, fear flashing in their glowing eyes. Ryan looked at his reflection on the broken glass of his ship. His face was bloody, his armor heavy, and compared to them, he was a monster. Then the crowd split. A taller figure walked forward, still small compared to Ryan, but clearly their leader. He wore a crown of woven silver leaves and carried a staff that glowed faintly with blue light. His eyes were sharp, his steps steady. This was their chief. The chief stopped in front of Ryan, staring up at him with both caution and curiosity. He raised his staff, and the whispers of the crowd died into silence. The chief spoke, his voice deeper than the others. Ryan could not understand the words, but the tone was clear. This was a judgment. The aliens looked at their leader, then at the human. Some bowed in fear, others trembled. Ryan felt his chest tighten. He didn't know if they would kill him or worship him or run away. He opened his mouth, tried to speak. "I am not your enemy," he said slowly, pointing at himself, then lowering his hand to the ground, showing peace. The aliens tilted, their heads confused. The chief's glowing eyes narrowed. Then, with a motion of his staff, he gave an order. The tiny warriors lowered their spears. Ryan let out a breath of relief. But it was not over. From the forest behind, a strange sound echoed, low, metallic, and terrifying. The ground trembled softly. The tiny aliens gasped, some clutching each other in fear. Ryan turned his head and saw faint lights moving between the trees. Red lights, cold, hunting lights. The chief's expression hardened. He spoke quickly, and the tiny aliens hurried, pulling Ryan's arm, trying to drag him away from the wreck. Their voices were urgent, desperate. Ryan realized what was happening. These creatures were not just curious, they were afraid. Something was coming, something dangerous. And they thought he could help. The chief looked at him one last time, his glowing eyes sharp with meaning. He touched his staff to the ground, and in a voice like thunder, he declared words that Ryan could not understand, yet the meaning was clear. "You will decide our fate." Ryan stood frozen, the weight of the moment sinking in. He had just crashed on this strange world, surrounded by fragile, tiny beings. And now they were looking to him, not as a threat, but as a shield. The forest shook again. The red lights grew closer. Ryan clenched his jaw, his heart racing. The arrival of one human had changed everything, and soon the true danger would reveal itself. The threat approaches. The forest was silent, too silent. Ryan stood among the tiny aliens, still dazed from his crash, while the chief's words echoed in his head. "You will decide our fate." But fate was already moving closer. From deep within the jungle, a sound rose like thunder, metal grinding, engines humming, heavy steps crushing the earth, and then faint red lights began to appear between the trees, like the eyes of hunting beasts. The tiny aliens trembled. Mothers pulled their children behind them. Warriors with crystal spears pressed close, though their hands shook. They looked small, fragile, but their fear was not for themselves, it was for their people. Ryan's instincts sharpened. Years of training came alive inside him. He knew those lights. He knew that sound. He had seen it on other battlefields. Whoever these enemies were, they weren't here by accident. They were hunters, raiders, destroyers. The chief stepped forward, his silver leaf crown glowing faintly in the moonlight. His eyes locked on Ryan's. He lifted his staff, speaking in a voice full of urgency. The words were alien, but the meaning was clear. Help us. Protect us. Stand with us. Ryan looked at the small faces around him, wide, glowing eyes, trembling hands, voices whispering his name even though they barely knew it. To them he was a giant, a warrior, a last hope. For a moment he hesitated. One man against an unknown army? It sounded insane. He was stranded, low on supplies, no backup, no contact with Earth. But then he clenched his fists. He couldn't just walk away, not from them. "All right," he muttered under his breath. "Let's see what I can do." He knelt down, pulling a sidearm from his damaged armor. The tiny aliens gasped at the sight of the weapon, its metallic body glowing faintly in the moonlight. To them, it was no simple tool. It was power. Ryan checked the magazine. Not much ammo left. He would have to use every shot wisely. The ground shook again, closer this time. The first shapes appeared from the darkness, towering machines twice as tall as Ryan. Their bodies gleamed with black armor, their limbs ending in blades and claws. Red lights burned from their heads, scanning the forest like predators. Behind them marched soldiers in dark suits, carrying weapons that hissed with energy. Their voices were cold, mechanical. They moved with perfect order, like a hunting pack. The tiny aliens shrank back, some covering their glowing eyes. A soft whimper ran through the crowd. Ryan stood tall. Compared to the machines, even he looked small. But when he raised his weapon, his voice was steady. "You want them?" he said, pointing back at the tiny aliens. "You'll have to go through me first." The machines froze for a moment, scanning him. Then one let out a piercing roar, its red light flashing brighter. The battle had begun. The first machine lunged forward, claws slicing through trees. Ryan dodged, rolling aside, and fired 3 quick shots. Sparks exploded as bullets tore into its joints. The creature staggered, fell to one knee, then collapsed with a crash. The tiny aliens gasped in awe. To them, this giant human fought like a storm. But there was no time to celebrate. More machines charged forward, their claws tearing the earth. Energy blasts sizzled through the air, striking the wreck of Ryan's ship and setting it ablaze. Ryan ducked behind a fallen tree, firing back with precision. One enemy soldier went down, then another. But his ammo was draining fast. Sweat ran down his face, his muscles burning. He couldn't keep this up forever. The chief shouted something in his strange tongue. Tiny warriors scattered into the forest, setting small traps, pits covered with leaves, ropes tied to bend branches. They were weak, but they were clever. One machine stumbled into a pit, its leg caught, and the aliens cheered. Ryan smiled grimly. They're fighting too. He reloaded, then leapt from cover, firing at the largest machine. Sparks flew, but the beast kept coming. It raised a claw to strike him down. At the last moment, Ryan rolled forward, sliding under its massive arm. He pressed his weapon to its chest and fired point blank. The machine screamed and fell backward, its red light fading to black. The aliens erupted in cries of victory. Their voices rang like bells, their courage rising. For the first time, they believed this human might really protect them. But Ryan's eyes narrowed. He knew this was just the beginning. These were scouts, the front line. If they were here, the main force wasn't far behind. As the last machine fell, silence returned to the forest. Smoke curled into the air. The ground was littered with broken metal and glowing weapons. Ryan stood, breathing hard, his weapon almost empty. The chief approached, placing a small hand on Ryan's arm. His glowing eyes were full of respect and fear. He spoke softly, and though Ryan didn't understand the words, he understood the meaning. This battle is won, but the war is coming. Ryan looked at the horizon. Red lights flickered in the distance, more than before. A whole army was waiting. He tightened his grip on his weapon. He had made his choice. He would stand with them. The threat was approaching, and he was ready. The first battle. The night burned with fire. The forest that had once whispered softly was now alive with war cries and the hiss of machines. The tiny aliens huddled together in fear as Ryan stood tall, weapon raised, his shadow stretching like a giant protector under the moonlight. He had fought battles before, he had seen blood, fire, and death. But this was different. Never before had an entire people looked at him as if he alone stood between life and extinction. The enemy came like a storm. Black-armored soldiers advanced in rows, their red visors glowing like soulless eyes. Behind them, more war machines stalked the trees, their claws dripping with sparks, their heavy steps crushing roots and stones. The tiny aliens trembled. Their spears looked useless against such monsters. But Ryan did not tremble. He took a deep breath and shouted, his voice thundering across the battlefield. "Hold your ground." The aliens did not understand his words, but they felt his spirit. They stood frozen, their glowing eyes wide as the first clash began. The human's fury Ryan moved like lightning. His rifle spat fire, bullets tearing through the armored soldiers. One fell, then another, sparks spraying across the night. He spun, aimed, fired again, every shot precise, every move sharp. The machines roared and charged, but Ryan met them head-on. He dived aside as one claw slammed down, the ground exploding in dirt and stone. He rolled, aimed at its weak joint, and fired. Metal cracked, sparks flew. The machine staggered, its red eye flickering before it collapsed in flames. The tiny aliens gasped. To them, this was no man. This was a god of war. But Ryan's face was grim. He knew his ammo was running low. He couldn't waste a single shot. "The tiny ones fight back," the chief shouted in his musical tongue, and the small warriors scattered. They darted between roots and rocks, their traps set and waiting. One machine chased them, its claw swinging down. But the ground beneath it gave way. It had stepped into a pit lined with sharp crystal spikes. The beast screamed, collapsing into its own death trap. Another group of tiny aliens pulled on ropes tied to a bent tree. When the enemy soldiers marched past, they released it. The tree snapped upright, flinging sharpened stakes into their ranks. The aliens' voices rose in a cheer, high and bright as two soldiers fell. Ryan saw it all, and for the first time a small smile crossed his face. They are not helpless, he thought. They are brave. The turning tide. But the enemy was not finished. A massive machine stepped forward, larger than the others, its armor thick, its claws glowing red-hot. It roared, shaking the trees. Ryan felt the heat from its burning eyes. He raised his weapon, but deep inside he knew this one would not fall so easily. The beast charged. Ryan fired, bullet after bullet bouncing off its thick armor. Sparks flew, but the machine did not slow. It swung its claw, and Ryan barely leapt aside as the ground exploded where he had stood. The aliens screamed. Their giant protector was in danger. Ryan's rifle clicked empty. No ammo left. He tossed it aside, drew his combat blade, and stood, tall. "Come on then," he growled. The machine charged again. Ryan ducked, rolled under it, and leapt onto its back. His blade flashed, stabbing at glowing joints. Sparks showered the forest. The beast screamed, twisting and thrashing. Ryan held on with all his strength. His blade plunged deep into its neck, cutting through wires and metal. With a final roar, the machine collapsed, crashing into the ground, smoke rising from its shattered body. The forest fell silent for a heartbeat. Then the aliens cheered, their tiny voices ringing like bells. They had seen the impossible. One man bringing down a monster of steel. The price of victory. But Ryan was breathing hard, his armor scorched, his blade broken in half. His body ached, sweat pouring down his face. He looked at the battlefield. Wrecked. Machines, fallen soldiers, smoking trees. They had won. For now. The chief approached, his glowing eyes filled with awe. He touched Ryan's arm gently, as if blessing him. The aliens bowed, their small hands pressed to their hearts. To them, he was not just a warrior, he was their savior. But Ryan's eyes stayed on the horizon. He knew better. This was only the first wave. The enemy would return, stronger, faster, and angrier. The chief spoke in his deep musical voice, pointing toward the distant hills. More red lights flickered in the darkness. An army was waiting. Ryan clenched his jaw. His weapon was gone, his ammo almost empty. And yet as he looked down at the tiny aliens surrounding him, children clutching their parents, warriors holding shattered spears, he made a silent promise. "I will not let them fall." He stood tall again, even as exhaustion weighed on him. His shadow stretched long in the firelight. The first battle was over, but the war had only just begun. The turning point. The battlefield was silent at last. Smoke curled into the sky, glowing red under the light of the two moons. Broken machines lay scattered across the forest floor, their metal bodies cracked and burning. Tiny alien voices whispered, in awe, their glowing eyes fixed on the lone human who stood among the wreckage. Ryan Cole, bloodied and exhausted, tightened his grip on his broken blade. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. He had fought hard, harder than ever before. He had saved them, for now. But his instincts screamed at him. This was not the end. The chief of the tiny aliens stepped forward. His crown of silver leaves glimmered in the firelight, his staff glowing faintly blue. He looked up at Ryan, his expression both grateful and heavy. In his language of musical tones, he spoke words Ryan could not understand, but the meaning was clear in his eyes. "You saved us, but danger still comes." Ryan nodded grimly. He didn't need words to know. He could already see it. Red lights flickering in the distant hills, shadows moving in the forest. The enemy was regrouping. The tiny aliens huddled together. Some whispered, Ryan's name as if it were a prayer. Others clutched broken spears, their courage dimming after seeing the scale of the fight. Ryan looked at them, these fragile beings who could barely reach his knee. Yet they had stood by him. They had set traps, fought with clever tricks, and risked their lives. They were small, yes, but not weak in spirit. He bent down, picking up a shard of crystal from the ground. Its surface glowed faintly, alive with strange energy. He turned it in his hand, realizing something. These crystals weren't just weapons for the aliens. They held power. Power that could change the fight. Ryan showed the shard to the chief. The alien leader's glowing eyes widened. He nodded, speaking quickly, calling his people forward. Warriors and elders gathered, bringing more shards, glowing brighter in their tiny hands. Ryan's heart stirred. For the first time he saw hope. Maybe he was not alone in this war. A plan is born. The chief spread a map carved on bark, showing valleys and rivers, mountains and caves. With gestures and symbols, he explained what Ryan slowly understood. The enemy's main force was camped near the ridge, preparing for a larger strike. Ryan's jaw tightened. If they waited, the enemy would crush them all. But if they struck first, together they might turn the tide. He pointed at the ridge, then at himself. Then he gestured to the tiny warriors, the traps, the glowing crystals. Slowly, the aliens understood. Their voices rose in agreement, their fear melting into courage. The chief touched Ryan's arm, sealing the plan. A human and a tribe of tiny aliens ready to fight side by side. Nightfall. Attack darkness covered the forest. The moons vanished behind clouds. The enemy camp glowed faintly in the distance. Rows of machines standing like statues, soldiers marching. In formation, strange banners fluttering in the wind. From the shadows, Ryan and the tiny warriors crept forward. The aliens moved silently, slipping between roots and rocks like shadows. Ryan crawled low, his eyes sharp, his blade ready. The first guard fell without a sound, Ryan's blade cutting the power lines of his armor. The second stumbled into a pit lined with glowing crystals, his scream swallowed by the night. The tiny aliens moved with perfect timing. Ropes tightened, traps snapped, and enemy soldiers vanished into hidden holes. They fought not with strength, but with cleverness. Ryan watched with pride. These beings, once trembling in fear, now moved with bravery. Together they were more than survivors, they were fighters. The clash but silence never lasts in war. A machine's red eye spotted movement. An alarm blared. The camp erupted in chaos. Now! Ryan shouted, his voice like thunder. He charged into the camp, slashing through soldiers, his blade flashing in the firelight. The aliens followed, their tiny war cries rising like a storm of bells. Crystals exploded against armor, ropes pulled, machines to the ground, and spears struck with surprising force. The battle was fierce. The enemy roared, their weapons cutting down trees and burning earth. Ryan fought like a whirlwind, striking down machine after machine. The aliens darted, between his legs, fighting at his side, their courage unshakable. For every soldier that rose, two more fell. For every machine that advanced, another was trapped. The tide was turning. The cost but victory had a price. The enemy was powerful, relentless. Some of the tiny warriors fell, their glowing eyes dimming forever. Ryan's heart clenched each time. He saw one collapse. He fought harder, his rage burning brighter. At last the chief raised his glowing staff high. The crystals around the camp pulsed with light, resonating together. A wave of energy burst outward, tearing through the enemy machines. Sparks flew, metal cracked, soldiers screamed. The battlefield went silent. The enemy force lay broken, their camp in ruins. Smoke and fire filled the air, a new bond. The tiny aliens gathered around Ryan, their voices rising in victory. For the first time, their songs were not of fear, but of triumph. They had fought. They had won. The chief stood before Ryan, placing his glowing staff at the human's feet. His voice rang clear, filled with pride. Though Ryan did not understand the words, he understood the meaning. You are one of us now. Ryan's chest tightened. He had come as a stranger, but now he was part of their people. But even in victory, he knew the truth. This was not the end. Somewhere beyond the stars, the enemy had more armies, more weapons, more hunger. And when they returned, he would be ready. The bond. The smoke of battle had faded. The enemy camp lay in ruins, its black machines shattered, its soldiers gone. The forest, once trembling with fire and fear, now sang again with the soft whispers of the wind. Ryan stood tall among the tiny aliens, his armor scorched, his body aching, but his spirit unbroken. Around him, the little people cheered, their glowing eyes shining with pride. They had fought. They had survived. And for the first time, they believed they could win. The chief stepped forward, his silver leaf crown glimmering in the firelight. He looked up at Ryan, his expression both grave and grateful. Raising his glowing staff high, he spoke in his deep, musical tongue. The tribe fell silent. The words were foreign, but the meaning was clear. This was no longer just a man. This was their savior, their protector, their brother. Ryan's chest tightened. He had never asked for this role, never wanted, to be worshipped. But as he looked at their small faces, children smiling, warriors saluting with crystal spears, he realized something. He had become part of their world. The celebration. That night, the tribe held a feast. Fires burned bright, filling the air, with the scent of roasted fruits and herbs. Tiny drums beat in rhythm and voices rose in song. The little aliens danced in circles, their glowing eyes sparkling with joy. Ryan sat near the largest fire, the chief by his side. Small bowls of alien food were placed before him, strange glowing fruits, crispy leaves, and something that looked suspiciously like roasted insects. Ryan hesitated, then took a bite. Sweet, crunchy, surprisingly good. The aliens cheered, clapping, their tiny hands. For once, Ryan allowed himself to smile. He had fought, bled, and nearly died. But tonight, there was peace. Tonight, there was family. The chief's gift. When the music softened and the fire dimmed, the chief rose. He lifted his staff, and the tribe grew quiet. Then he turned to Ryan, speaking with solemn words. His voice was heavy, his eyes serious. The aliens shifted, whispering among themselves. Then, from the crowd, a young female stepped forward. She was small, even for her people, with golden skin that shimmered like sunlight and eyes that glowed a soft blue. She carried a wreath of silver leaves in her tiny hands. Ryan blinked, confused. He watched as she approached, her steps shy but steady. The tribe erupted in cheers, their voices ringing like bells. Ryan frowned. "Wait, what's happening?" The chief spoke loudly, placing his staff between Ryan and the girl. Though Ryan couldn't understand the words, the meaning hit him like a thunderbolt. This wasn't just honor. This was marriage. The young female bowed, holding up the wreath. The tribe shouted in joy, chanting in their musical tongue. Ryan's mouth dropped open. "What? No, 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 wait a second." The aliens ignored his protest. To them, this was sacred. He had defended them, saved them, bled for them. And now he was one of them. Truly one of them. And that meant a wife. Shock and laughter. Ryan's mind spun. He looked down at the tiny girl who barely reached his knee. She gazed up at him with wide, curious eyes. Not fearful, not timid, just expectant. The crowd cheered louder, clapping their small hands, some even tossing glowing petals into the air. Ryan muttered under his breath, "This is insane." He raised his hands, trying to explain. "Listen, I can't. This isn't..." But the chief stepped forward, placing a hand on Ryan's knee. His glowing eyes were calm, firm, unyielding. His voice rumbled like thunder, and though Ryan did not know the words, the message was clear. This is our way. Accept it. Ryan sighed, rubbing his forehead. He had faced monsters, machines, and death itself, but nothing had prepared him for this. The young female placed the wreath on his arm, smiling, softly. The tribe erupted in wild cheers. Drums thundered, voices rose, and the night exploded with celebration. Ryan sat frozen, stunned, while the aliens danced around him. For the first time in his life, he was married, to someone barely the size of his boot. A bond beyond marriage, but as the night wore on, Ryan began to see the truth. This wasn't about romance. It wasn't about love. It was about unity. The chief had given him more than a wife. He had given him a bond to their people, a promise that Ryan was no longer an outsider, a symbol that he belonged here, with them, for better or worse. The young female sat beside him quietly, her blue eyes glowing softly. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. Her presence was enough. She was a reminder that he was tied to this tribe, to their fate, to their survival. Ryan sighed again, shaking his head. "Well," he muttered, "guess I'm family now." The shadow ahead, as the fires dimmed and the tribe drifted into sleep, Ryan rose, looking toward the dark horizon. Beyond the hills, faint red lights glowed again. The enemy was not finished. They had lost this battle, But they would return, with more soldiers, more machines, more fury. Ryan clenched his fists. He was tired, broken, still trying to understand his new bond. But deep inside, a fire burned brighter than ever. He had a people to protect. He had a promise to keep. And now he had a family. The war was far from over. The final war. The night before the storm was quiet. Too quiet. Ryan stood at the edge of the alien village, staring at the horizon. In the distance, the hills glowed faintly red. The enemy was gathering. More machines, more soldiers, an army unlike anything the little tribe had ever faced. The tiny aliens prepared as best they could. Warriors sharpened crystal spears. Children carried stones and ropes. Elders carved symbols of protection into the ground. The chief stood tall, his silver leaf crown glowing faintly in the moonlight, his staff pulsing with energy. Beside Ryan, the young female, the one the tribe now called his wife, watched silently. Her glowing blue eyes were calm, but her small hands trembled. She was no warrior, but her presence reminded Ryan of what was at stake. These people, fragile and small, had given him their trust. Now he had to give them hope. He turned to the chief, pointing to the valley where the enemy would arrive. "We fight there," he said firmly. The chief nodded. Words were not needed anymore. The enemy arrives at dawn. The ground shook. The enemy marched in endless rows. Black-armored soldiers with glowing red visors, towering machines, claws dripping with energy. Warships hovered above the valley, casting shadows across the land. Their voices roared like thunder, a chorus of metal and hate. The tiny aliens stood their ground, no taller than Ryan's knees, yet their eyes blazed with courage. They held their crystal spears tightly. Their voices rose in chants, high and sharp, ringing across the valley. Ryan moved among them, checking traps, steadying nerves. His armor was battered, his rifle almost empty, but he stood like a wall of steel. When the first machine roared, he raised his voice. "Hold! Don't break!" The aliens didn't understand his words, but they understood his strength. Together, they braced for war. Clash of worlds. The battle exploded with fire. Enemy machines charged, their claws slashing through the air. Soldiers fired beams of red energy, burning the ground. The valley shook under their assault, but the tiny aliens struck back. Traps snapped shut, ropes tightened, and hidden pits swallowed metal beasts. Crystals exploded in bright flashes, blinding enemy soldiers. From the trees, warriors leapt, striking with spears that glowed like lightning. And at the center of it, all Ryan. He fought like a storm. His broken blade cut through armor. His fists smashed metal skulls. His voice roared across the valley, a cry of defiance. He was everywhere, shielding children, lifting fallen warriors, striking down machines twice his size. The enemy had numbers, but Ryan had something they did not. Unshakable will. Betrayal. The fight raged on, blood and fire staining the earth. But then from the enemy's side, a shadow stepped forward. It was not a soldier, not a machine. It was a figure in dark robes, its face hidden by a mask of metal. Its voice boomed across the battlefield. "The human belongs to us." The tiny aliens froze. Even Ryan felt a chill. The figure raised its hand and the machines halted for a moment. Then it spoke again. "He is not your savior. He is your doom. Give him to us and we will spare you," the tribe murmured in fear. For a moment, doubt flickered in their glowing eyes. Ryan felt it, the weight of their fear, the crack in their courage. He stepped forward, raising his voice. "Don't listen, they want to divide us." The chief slammed his staff into the ground, blue energy pulsing outward. His voice thundered, "He is one of us." The aliens roared in answer. The doubt vanished. The bond held strong. The robed figure hissed in anger. With a gesture, the machines roared forward again. The war resumed in full fury. The last stand hours passed. The battlefield was chaos. Smoke, fire, screams. Ryan fought until his body ached, his vision blurred, his hands bled. Around him, the tiny aliens fought with the same fire, refusing to yield, but the enemy's numbers seemed endless. For every machine they destroyed, 2 more appeared. For every soldier that fell, another took his place. At last, the great enemy warlord appeared, a massive machine, taller than the trees, its body glowing with molten fire, its claws dripped with energy, its voice a roar of death. Ryan looked, up, his jaw tight. "So it's you," he muttered. The beast charged, shaking the ground. Ryan charged too, his broken blade glowing faintly with stolen crystal energy. The two collided in an explosion of sparks and fire. The fight was brutal. The machine struck like a storm, its claws tearing earth and stone. Ryan dodged, rolled, stabbed with all his strength. The tiny alien swarmed its legs, throwing crystals, pulling ropes, climbing like ants on a giant. At last, Ryan leapt high, driving his blade deep into the machine's chest. Blue and red light exploded together. The beast roared, then collapsed, with a crash that shook the valley. Silence followed. Victory and fire. The enemy line broke. Machines stumbled. Soldiers fled. The warlord's fall shattered their courage. The red lights faded, one by one, until the valley was quiet. The tiny aliens stared in shock. Then their voices rose in song, loud, bright, victorious. They had done the impossible. They had survived the final war. Ryan stood among them, his armor broken, his blade gone, his body trembling. But he stood. He looked at the cheering aliens, at the chief raising his staff high, at the young female smiling through tears, and for the first time, he allowed himself to believe they had won. But, as the tribe celebrated, Ryan looked to the sky. Far beyond, the clouds, faint glimmers of light moved. Ships, fleets, more enemies perhaps. His chest tightened. The war was not truly over. This was only one battle in a much greater storm. But for now, they had victory. For now, they had hope. Ryan clenched his fists and whispered, "Let them come. We'll be ready." The human had stood with the tiny aliens. Together, they had faced the final war, and together, they had won. The legacy, the valley lay silent after the storm of war. Smoke rose into the pale morning sky. Broken machines lay like fallen giants, their red eyes dim forever. The earth was scarred, trees torn apart, but the people still stood. Tiny voices rose in song, soft at first, then swelling into a chorus of victory. The little aliens danced among the ruins, their glowing eyes bright with joy. They had fought. They had survived. And at the heart of it all stood Ryan Cole, the human who had come from the stars. His armor was broken. His blade was gone. His body bore wounds that would never fully heal. But he stood tall, watching them, his chest heavy with pride. The songs. Of heroes that night, the tribe lit great fires. Around the flames they sang stories of the battle, their high voices weaving words that would pass through generations. They sang of the black machines, of the fire that swallowed the forest, of the moment when all hope seemed lost. And then they sang of him, the human who stood like a mountain, who struck down the warlord with a single glowing blade, who fought, not for glory but for family. Ryan sat near the fire, listening. He didn't understand the language, but he understood the meaning. Every note, every cheer, every tear. They were for him. The young female, the one they had given him as wife, sat beside him. She placed her small hand on his arm. Her touch was gentle, her blue eyes full of gratitude. Ryan smiled faintly. He still didn't know what to call this bond, but he knew it was real. He was no longer alone. The chief's words. When the songs ended, the chief stood. His silver leaf crown gleamed in the firelight, his staff glowing with power. He raised his voice, speaking not just to his people but to Ryan as well. His words were long, heavy, musical. But at the end, he placed his staff at Ryan's feet. The tribe gasped, then bowed. Ryan understood. This was no small gesture. The staff was more than a symbol. It was leadership. The chief was declaring him not just an ally, not just family, but part of their destiny. Ryan shook his head slowly. "I'm no king," he muttered. But when he looked at their eyes, hopeful, trusting, he knew there was no refusing. Scars of war days passed. The tribe rebuilt their homes. Fallen trees were lifted, fires put out, new shelters raised. The little ones played again, laughter returning to the forest. But the scars of war remained. Many warriors had fallen. Families wept for those who would never return. Ryan stood with them, bowing his head at each funeral fire. He was no stranger to loss, but this cut deeper. These were not soldiers. They were farmers, hunters, children who had picked up spears to defend their lives. He clenched his fists. He had protected them, but not all. He carried that weight silently. A legend born one evening. The chief gathered the tribe again. This time the songs were different. Not just victory songs, they were legends, tales to be passed to children not yet born. The story was already changing. They spoke of a man from the stars who fell like a burning comet, a man so tall he could block out the moon, a man who faced an army alone, who fought like thunder, whose roar shook the mountains. Ryan chuckled softly. That's not how it happened. But he didn't correct them. Legends weren't about facts. They were about hope, and he had given them that, the human's choice. As the days turned to weeks, Ryan knew he had a choice. He could try to repair his broken ship, to send a signal, to hope for rescue. He could return to the human worlds, but when he looked at the tribe, he realized he no longer wanted to leave. He had spent years fighting wars for governments that forgot his name. Here he had fought for something real, for people who looked at him not as a weapon but as a shield. Here he was not just a soldier. He was family. Ryan stood one night beneath the twin moons, watching the young female beside him laugh with children. He smiled faintly. I guess I'm home. The shadow of tomorrow, yet far above the clouds, unseen by those below. Lights still moved in the dark. The enemy was not gone. The final war had been only one battle in a greater conflict that stretched across stars. Ryan knew they would return, perhaps not tomorrow, perhaps not for years, but they would come. And when they did, this world would not be the same. The tiny aliens were no longer helpless. They were warriors, united, brave, and with him among them, they would face whatever. Came the legend lives. As the fires burned low and the tribe drifted to sleep, Ryan stood alone at the edge of the forest. The wind carried their songs through the trees, songs of the human who came from the stars, songs of the protector who became their own. He smiled faintly, whispering to himself, I was just a soldier, but to them, I'm more. And so the story began to spread, from one voice to another, from one generation to the next. The tale of the human who defended the tiny aliens. The tale of the stranger who became family. The tale of the man who arrived in fire and left as a legend.